happens when poems lie? When the songs don't cry? When people have conversations about you or around you? When the love ain't real, but they want you to believe it is? What happens when poets speak death over lives and lives are truly lost? What happens when sides are chosen without the options? What happens when calls are made to stop your progress? What happens when the mess is made and no one is there to clean it up? What happens when your business partner plays both sides? What happens when your family wishes death upon you? What happens when that eviction notice is served? What happens when your daughter is raped at gunpoint? What happens when death takes someone unexpectedly? What happens when depression takes control and consumes you? What happens when the love ain't enough to make him love you? What happens when three amigos become deuces? What happens when failure becomes a master course? What happens when baby daddy says he don't want to deal with his child anymore? What happens when the unemployment check stops? What happens when your dreams are everyone else's nightmares? What happens when they forget about all the times you did for them? What happens when you look in the mirror and you hate your reflection? What happens when that becomes your projection to the world? What happens when losing people becomes numbing? What happens when the hustle don't match the bank account? What happens when you have to send your kids away because you can't take care of them? You're a failure. What happens when they love you anyways? What happens when grandma starts to forget your name? What happens when your favorite uncle loses his life saving a friend? What happens when suicide seems like the best route? What happens when your brother gets off his meds and starts listening to the voices in his head? What happens when the Baker Acts have no impact? What happens when the pain is all you know? What happens when God stops answering your prayers? What happens when your best friend is watching her mother fight for her life? Cancer sucks. What happens when there's no more savings in your account and it is in the negative? What happens when you can't see the positive? What happens when your brother has to be your father? What happens when the state wants to give him life? What happens when the hood ain't all good? What happens when your truth ain't what they want to hear? What happens when all you have left is your voice? What happens when what happens happens to be the things that needed to happen? What happens to black girls like me?
The